The skies above Veltrax were no longer blue. They burned with the fire of invasion. The once thriving capital city, Anvara, stood shattered beneath the dark shadow of the Karathi Dominion, a ruthless alien empire that took what it wanted and left behind only ash. Veltrax had always been a peaceful, neutral world, known for its advanced medical research and its open ports, but none of that mattered now. The Karathi didn't care about politics or peace. They only saw resources, slaves, and strategic ground. For weeks, the Veltraxi had sent distress calls across the stars, begging the Galactic Assembly for help. But the Assembly, bound by their precious non-interference charter, did nothing. They watched the death of a planet from their ivory towers and did not move a single ship. Ambassador Talon Var, one of Veltrax's last remaining leaders, stood in the ruins of the Planetary Council chamber, his violet skin scorched from a nearby explosion, his voice raw from pleading. Around him, holograms of Assembly representatives flickered cold and distant. They all gave the same excuse: we cannot get involved. No one is allowed to interfere. Talon's heart sank, knowing his people were being abandoned, not because they weren't worth saving, but because helping them would be inconvenient for powers that lived light years away. In orbit, Karathi ships circled like vultures, slowly tightening their grip. They were methodical and cruel, sending ground forces into surviving cities to round up prisoners and crush any pockets of resistance. Veltrax's defense fleet had been destroyed in the first day. Their ground forces were brave, but hopelessly outmatched. Mothers hid children in cellars, scientists turned to makeshift weapons, doctors became field medics stitching wounds without supplies. Every night, the screams of war echoed across the shattered cities, while the stars above remained cold and silent. The people of Veltrax had stopped hoping. The galaxy had turned its back on them. But on a quiet outpost far beyond the battle lines, something happened that changed everything. A small civilian shuttle, loaded with Veltraxi refugees, mostly women and children, managed to escape the blockade and vanished into deep space. No one in the Assembly noticed. But someone else did. On the outer edge of Sol space, the shuttle drifted into Terran territory. Its distress beacon pinged for hours before being picked up by a patrol drone. Inside, half the passengers were injured, and a few had already died. The rest looked terrified and broken. When Earth's AI defense grid scanned the contents of the shuttle when it saw the crying children, the destroyed identity tags, and the burned planetary ID, it took less than 60 seconds to send an alert to Earth's Central Command. And just like that, a meeting was called deep under the Pacific Ocean in a command bunker called Black Horizon. Generals, admirals, and defense ministers sat around a table while satellite feeds lit up with reports of the Veltrax massacre. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Assembly a generation ago, and they'd always been treated like newcomers, respected for their innovation, but never trusted with real power. Earth had obeyed the rules, signed the treaties, and promised never to step out of line. But now the war was no longer a distant headline. Now the violence had reached their border. And Earth remembered something the Assembly had forgotten. Sometimes rules have to be broken to do what's right. They moved fast. Earth's war fleet, officially designated inactive by Assembly law, was reactivated in a single night. Across the Moon, Mars, and the orbital platforms around Jupiter, warships powered up after decades of silence. Black Steel, experimental weaponry, Adaptive A, this was not the clunky old fleet the Assembly had once laughed at. This was something new, something built in secret for a war no one wanted to believe would come. Admiral Rylan Cortez, a veteran of the early colony wars, was placed in command. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for debate. He sent a single message to the Assembly: we are answering a call for help. Interference or not, Earth will not watch another world burn. And then they jumped. The fleet moved like a silent storm through slipspace, 100 ships tearing across the void, faster than any other species believed possible. Their signal profiles were scrambled, their weapons systems cloaked. The Karathi wouldn't see them coming, at least not until it was far too late. Meanwhile, above Veltrax, the Dominion's fleet began shifting into full lockdown, preparing to launch their final assault on the last remaining cities. On the surface, Talon Var stood atop a broken tower, watching the skies with hollow eyes, whispering a prayer to stars that had never answered. But then something happened. The stars shifted. Lights blinked in the upper atmosphere, new ones. Hundreds. Thousands. The air buzzed with tension, and orbital sensors went crazy. The Karathi commander ordered a full alert, thinking maybe it was a malfunction. But then the new ships emerged. They came from nowhere, black and angular, like flying shadows lit with glowing blue engines. The Terran warships dropped from slip space in tight formations, surrounding the entire Karathi fleet in seconds. No warning, no prelude, just presence. The Karathis scrambled their fighters. A message blinked on every channel, translated into every known language, to all aggressors stand down. This planet is under Terran protection. Silence followed. Then chaos. The Karathi opened fire. Earth responded. The battle began with the soundless flash of rail cannons and precision lasers. Terran fighters moved like insects, swarming in formations too tight for normal pilots. But these were not normal pilots. Some were enhanced. Some weren't even human anymore. On the surface, Veltraxi survivors looked to the skies and saw blue fire, slicing through the dark. For the first time in weeks, they saw their enemies falling, one by one. Ship by ship, a child tugged at Talon's robes and asked, "Who are they?" The ambassador, unable to speak, watched as a massive Terran dreadnought drifted overhead, blocking out the sun. And in that moment, hope returned. High above, in the lead ship's command center, Admiral Cortez stood with arms folded, watching the chaos unfold with quiet precision. Earth had interfered, and they were just getting started. The battlefield above Veltrax had transformed from a slow, grinding siege into a chaotic storm of fire and fury. When the Earth War fleet arrived, they didn't wait for diplomacy or approval, they acted. Their ships were unlike anything the Karathi had ever seen. Sleek black hulls reflected the burning stars, and their weapons were silent but devastating. Every shot was precise, every movement calculated. The Karathi had expected slow resistance, maybe a few outdated patrol vessels at most, but what came for them was a coordinated force that struck with speed and aggression. Their command ships, once untouched in every battle they fought, were now exploding one by one in eerie silence, as rail slugs ripped through their cores and missile swarms found weak points in their armor. Terran fighters weaved through enemy lines like they had been training for this exact moment their entire lives, and perhaps they had. Meanwhile, on the surface, the people of Veltrax watched in stunned silence. They had cried for help for weeks and received nothing. Now, out of nowhere, came a race they barely knew, humans, who were once seen as the Assembly's newest and quietest members. No one had expected Earth to respond, but they had. And they had come with power. The Galactic Assembly, floating in its artificial orbital station at the center of neutral space, was thrown into confusion. News of Earth's attack on the Karathi spread like wildfire through the diplomatic channels. Holograms lit up in dozens of languages as envoys demanded explanations and leaders called emergency meetings. Earth had broken the law, the most sacred law of all, non-interference. The rule had been made to keep balance, to avoid wars between powerful species, and to ensure that no one acted out of emotion or alliance. But now Earth had broken that balance, and the question everyone asked was, why? Some called it arrogance, others called it madness, but a few, those who had watched quietly, called it something else entirely: courage. The Assembly demanded an answer, but Earth gave them none. Their communication channels were silent. Not a single message came back from the Terran Command Center, not even when the High Council directly ordered them to stand down. This silence only created more fear, because silence meant confidence. Silence meant Earth didn't care what the Assembly thought, they cared only about the people on the ground. Back on Veltrax, the battle raged on. Terran ground forces had begun deploying to the surface in waves, dropping in armored pods that smashed through the smoke and ash like thunder from the heavens. Each pod carried soldiers and advanced exo-armor machines of flesh and steel, trained not just to fight, but to protect. They moved in squads, clearing out Karathi bunkers, rescuing survivors and restoring order with machine-like precision. One such squad landed near the ruined city of Naurelis, where hundreds of Veltraxi civilians had been trapped for days, without food or water. As the soldiers breached the blockade, their weapons glowing in the low light, the Karathi fled, unable to withstand the sheer firepower. A young Veltraxi boy stepped out from the rubble, staring at the strange beings before him. One of the Terrans, his armor scarred from battle, knelt and handed the boy a ration pack. The child looked at it, confused. The soldier only smiled behind his helmet and said, "You're safe now." That moment spread like fire through the underground networks of Veltrax. Humans weren't just fighting. They were saving lives. They were defending the weak. They were something the galaxy hadn't seen in a long time, protectors without profit. But not all were pleased. High above, inside the command chamber of the Karathi flagship, Lord Krazan watched the defeat unfold with rage boiling beneath his scaled skin. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. Veltrax was meant to fall quickly, to become another conquered jewel in their crown. Now they were being humiliated by a species no one had taken seriously. The humans had made a mockery of the Dominion's power, and Krazan would not allow that to stand. In the depths of his ship, engineers activated an ancient and forbidden weapon, the Planet Splitter Cannon. It was a last resort meant to destroy a world completely if it could not be controlled. If Veltrax couldn't belong to the Karathi, then it wouldn't belong to anyone. The cannon charged slowly, its energy building with a deep hum that echoed through the metal walls. The plan was simple: wipe out everything, Veltraxi, Terrans, and any witnesses, then retreat and blame the destruction on a reactor failure. But Krazan had underestimated Earth again. Admiral Cortez, watching the battlefield from the bridge of the ISS Nightfall, had already detected the energy spike. Earth's sensors were more advanced than the Karathi realized. They weren't just watching, they were listening, feeling, analyzing. Within minutes, Cortez ordered the most dangerous maneuver Earth had ever attempted in combat, a blind microjump directly inside enemy space. The ISS Phantom, a stealth-capable cruiser equipped with a slip-space drive prototype, vanished from orbit and reappeared inside the Karathi flagship with a shudder that split space-time itself. It was a miracle the ship didn't tear apart. For a second, the crew on the Phantom stood in absolute silence, systems flickering, air humming with static. Then the commander gave the order. Dozens of micro-drones launched from the ship's internal bays, targeting the power core of the dreadnought. In less than a minute, the entire ship lit up from within like a second sun, and then exploded into a million pieces, its twisted remains falling toward the planet like burning rain. The cannon never fired. The threat was over. But what Earth had done was impossible. No ship had ever jumped inside another. No species had ever dared to try. The tactic became legend within hours. Across the galaxy, the whispers began rumors of humans who didn't follow the rules, who built ships that could move through shadows and hit before you even saw them. They began calling the maneuver the jump knife. It was a word that echoed fear into the hearts of Earth's enemies, and hope into the hearts of those who had once been helpless. The Karathi, once proud and untouchable, were now silent. Their fleets began to pull back. Their command lines went dark. And on Veltrax, the people looked up into the smoke-filled sky and saw Terran ships holding their ground, not to conquer, but to guard. But peace did not follow. As soon as Earth's victory became public, new dangers began to appear. Minor species began secretly reaching out to Earth, begging for help. Messages from war-torn colonies flooded Earth systems, calls for aid, for defense, for rescue. Some were ignored. Most were accepted. Earth didn't officially declare a new role, but they didn't need to. The galaxy understood humans were no longer just another member of the assembly. They had become something else, something powerful, dangerous, and deeply human. They were the ones who showed up when no one else did. The assembly panicked. Sanctions were placed. Trade lines were threatened. Speeches were made in fire and fury. But Earth did not respond. They didn't need to. Their message was already out there, spoken not in words, but in action. And then, Just when it seemed like the galaxy might settle into a new balance, a message arrived. It was intercepted by Terran satellites, encoded in an ancient frequency long thought dead. It wasn't from the Karathi. It wasn't from a colony. It was coordinates and a warning. A single sentence blinked across the command screen in blood-red letters. They're watching. They will not let you win again. Admiral Cortez read the message twice, then looked out the window of his ship as it drifted silently over Veltrax. He knew this wasn't over. Someone, somewhere, was angry that Earth had broken the rules. And worse, they were preparing to punish them for IT.IN the days following the battle for Veltrax, while the smoke still curled in the sky and Terran medics worked side by side with Veltraxi healers to save what remained of the cities. Something strange began to echo across deep space. Earth's war fleet had won a victory that shocked the galaxy, but as the celebration faded in the quiet rebuilding, the shadows began to shift again. Unknown signals bounced across the edge of Terran territory, encrypted pings that matched no known civilization, with no origin point and no consistent rhythm. At first, Command thought it was background radiation or ghost echoes left by the battle, but when a single message repeated itself in perfect binary over 37 times, the fleet's A's confirmed something terrifying. Someone was watching, and they had technology capable of hiding in the dark. Between stars. Back on the ISS Nightfall, Admiral Rylan Cortez reviewed the decoded coordinates and narrowed his eyes at the star map, where a red dot blinked in a dead zone of unclaimed space. That sector was supposed to be empty, no stars, no planets, just cold void. Yet that's where the signal came from. Against all warnings from the Assembly and his own advisors, Cortez ordered a single vessel to investigate a Scout-class stealth ship named ISS Revenant, small enough to disappear, fast enough to run, and smart enough to survive. Its captain was someone Cortez trusted completely, Commander Lyra Vose, a war veteran known for never losing a ship, not even when she was outnumbered and surrounded. She took the mission without hesitation, her voice steady as she promised to bring back answers or not come back at all. The Revenant slipped into slipspace like a ghost, its drive silent and its signal cloaked. Inside, the crew of 12 moved with quiet focus, every one of them hand-picked for Black Ops missions that never made it into the official logs. The journey took 26 hours across uncharted space, during which the stars vanished from the windows and a strange silence pressed against the hull. Even the ship's AI reported minor fluctuations in power that it couldn't explain, flickers in systems that didn't match any malfunction patterns. When they finally dropped out of slipspace, what they saw was impossible. There, in the dead zone, floated a massive wreck larger than a city, shaped like a broken arrowhead, drifting slowly with no lights and no motion. It wasn't Karathi. It wasn't Terran. It wasn't anything from any known archive. The Revenant scanned the structure and found no life signs, no power signature, and no trace of propulsion systems. But the most chilling part was this: the outer hull showed no damage. There were no blast marks, no burn scars, nothing to suggest a battle. It looked like it had simply died in space, but the AI kept insisting that the ship was not dead. Something in the readings said the structure still held energy, but it was folded so deep within its layers that normal scanners couldn't reach it. Vose stared at the ship through the viewport and felt something she hadn't felt in years: unease. They docked with the strange craft using a mechanical clamp, and a 4-person team entered through an airlock that seemed almost too ready to receive them, like the ship had been waiting. Inside, the halls were tall and smooth, built from a dark material that shimmered like black glass, and their footsteps made no sound. There were no signs of battle, no bodies, no broken systems, just silence. The walls hummed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that none of their instruments could explain, and though no one said it aloud, all of them felt it. They were being watched. Deeper inside, they found something like a command center, with floating crystals instead of screens and symbols that shifted as they looked at them. Vose reached out, and as her fingers touched one of the crystals, the room lit up with a burst of light that blinded the team for a second, and then they weren't in the room anymore. In their minds, images played like memories of stars exploding, of massive wars between empires that no longer existed, of ships that moved like living creatures. The vision showed them a time before the assembly, before Earth's first radio signals ever touched the sky. A war had been fought here, one that ended with something so powerful that all sides agreed to hide it away. The ship they had entered was not a ship at all. It was a prison, and what it had been built to contain was waking up. Back on the Revenant, the crew monitoring the team's vitals saw spikes in neural activity that bordered on dangerous. They tried to call Vose and her team, but the comms were dead. The air outside the ship had gone still, the surrounding void now filled with faint patterns runes, etched in invisible radiation, now glowing faintly in the dark. As they worked to re-establish contact, a tremor ran through the alien craft, and the docking clamps began to melt. Not melt, as if the ship itself was rejecting the connection. Inside, Vose and her team suddenly came to their senses, stumbling out of the memory trance, their minds reeling. One of the Marines collapsed, nose bleeding, muttering something over and over. "It's still alive. It never died." The walls pulsed again, and for the first time, the ship spoke not with words, but with feeling, pressing an emotion into their minds so heavy it made them drop to their knees. It wasn't hatred. It was hunger. The entity sealed inside the structure had survived the collapse of its creators. It had been alone for longer than history could measure. And now it had been found. Vose screamed for an emergency evac, but it was too late. The alien ship reactivated, systems lighting up from within, and its hull began to reshape itself like a living creature waking from sleep. The Revenant pulled back, thrusters firing full burn, but the structure reached out not with weapons, but with gravity, folding space around itself in unnatural ways. For a moment, the scout ship disappeared from all Terran tracking systems. Then, a full hour later, it reappeared near the edge of soul space, drifting and damaged, as if it had never moved. The hull was scarred with symbols glowing like fire. The ship's AI had been wiped clean. Of the 12 crew members, only one remained, Lyra Vose. She was found in the command chair, unconscious, gripping a crystal shard in her hand that didn't match anything Earth had ever created. When she woke up 3 days later, she spoke only one sentence before falling back into a coma. "It's coming through the gate." The assembly went into full lockdown after the incident. No one could explain how the Revenant returned or what force had sent it back. Earth's top scientists studied the shard, but it defied all testing, reacting only to human touch and projecting faint voices in forgotten languages. Something ancient had been found in the void, something locked away for a reason. And now, because of Earth's interference, the prison was broken. Whispers spread that it was not just a ship, but a key, a weapon, a mind too vast to understand. Terran Command debated whether to destroy the evidence or prepare for war, but Cortez knew there was no hiding anymore. Earth had entered a part of the galaxy no one dared explore. And someone or something was coming. The signal from Commander Lyra Vose had changed everything. And though her body still lay in a coma aboard the ISS Nightfall, her words echoed through every corridor of Earth's high. "Command, it's coming through the gate." For days, analysts scrambled to understand what she meant, decoding fragments of her brain scan, tracking the symbols burned into the hull of the ISS Revenant, and studying the strange shard she brought back. Then, from deep space, near the borders of assembly-controlled regions, old gravitational monitors, long thought obsolete, picked up something moving. It was not a fleet. It was not a ship in the traditional sense. It was space itself bending unnaturally, like the stars were being swallowed, one by one, as a massive presence passed through them. Planets fell silent, satellites vanished, and long-range probes were swallowed whole by a blackness no one could explain. What had once been locked away had returned. The Terrans called it the Gatewalker, a word that felt too small for what was coming. Assembly leaders met in secret, trying to spin the story, calling it a Terran illusion, a lie to gain power, but even they couldn't ignore what came next. A border colony called Virene 6 sent a distress signal that never finished transmitting. Its last image was of the sky breaking open like torn cloth, revealing something behind it that was not made of metal or matter, but of thought and hunger. No debris was left behind. Just silence. The assembly, now panicked, turned to Earth not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Every defense fleet they sent had vanished. Every Alliance ship that tried to approach the darkness had gone cold. Only Earth had returned from it, scarred but alive. Now, all eyes turned to one planet. Earth didn't promise miracles. They promised resistance. At the edge of Sol System, where Earth's influence met the unclaimed dark, the Terran fleet prepared their final line. Massive orbital platforms were moved into place, their railguns loaded with tungsten rounds the size of buses. Minefields were deployed, drone swarms activated, and experimental energy barriers tested under pressure. Earth's colonies were evacuated, military channels flooded with grim warnings, and civilians across human space watched as the largest defensive operation in their history unfolded in silence. Ships were pulled from every sector. The ISS Nightfall took position at the center of the line, acting as command, while the Revenant, now sealed and guarded, was stored in a classified dry dock far beneath Mars' surface. Admiral Cortez, standing on the Nightfall's bridge, stared out at the black space ahead, his jaw tight. He didn't give speeches. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. Every soldier, pilot, and engineer across the fleet knew what they were facing. This wasn't a war for territory or power. This was survival. They had seen what the Gatewalker did to Veltrax's skies. They had heard the recordings, the low hum, the tearing sound, the sudden silence. The line they held was not just for Earth, but for every world that didn't have weapons, for every species the Assembly had abandoned. Humanity had made a choice long ago when they interfered, to protect, even if it broke the rules. Now, they would defend that promise with steel and fire. Then it began. Without warning, the space ahead cracked like glass, and through the fractures came darkness that was alive. The Gatewalker did not arrive in a ship. It was the ship, the storm, the thought given shape. Its form stretched for kilometers, shifting and warping in ways the mind couldn't hold. It emitted no heat, no light, only a pressure that made weaker AI systems shut down and caused some Terran crew to bleed from the nose just by looking at it. Earth's fleet opened fire immediately. Thousands of rounds lit up space, missile trails glowing like comets, drones swarming like insects, lasers sweeping across the void, but the thing kept moving. Some rounds vanished mid-flight. Others passed through it like it was a shadow. But then something strange happened. When the Gatewalker moved closer to the Revenant's last location, the shard in the vault beneath Mars began to glow and pulse in sync with the entity's movement. Scientists noticed that whenever the shard pulsed, the Gatewalker hesitated, slowing for brief seconds. A connection was clear. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a leash. Vos had brought back a piece of the cage, and it was still reacting to the monster. Cortez was given a choice: retreat and protect the shard, or hold the line to buy time for another plan. He chose to hold. Wave after wave of Terran firepower struck the entity as the fleet moved into aggressive formations. Ship after ship repositioned, forming interlocking shields and overlapping fields of fire. Even as some vessels were torn apart by unseen energy, they didn't break. The ISS Tempest sacrificed itself to block a surge wave that would have cracked the center line. The Archer Wing, Earth's elite fighter unit, flew suicide runs into the Gatewalker's form, delivering high-yield plasma bombs and disrupting its shape, if only for seconds. Every second counted. Behind the front line, Earth's engineers raced to unlock more from the shard. Then, deep in her coma, Vos stirred. Her brainwaves surged, matching the shard's pulse. She whispered words in a language no Terran translator could decode, and for a moment, every AI across the fleet froze and then rebooted with new data. Somehow, Vos was feeding them information, relayed through the shard. New coordinates, firing solutions, pattern recognition. The Gatewalker wasn't invincible, just complicated. Cortez ordered the data uploaded fleet-wide. The effect was instant. Coordinated shots landed more effectively. Drones began to slow the thing down. The tide didn't turn, but it stopped sliding. The battle raged for 6 hours, with the line holding inch by inch. Ships burned. Hulls cracked. Bodies floated in the silence between firestorms. But Earth didn't fall back. They fought not like an empire, but like a cornered species with nothing to lose and everything to protect. The Gatewalker began to adapt, changing its form again, releasing waves of mental pressure that crushed some weaker ships entirely. But still, Earth held. And then, a break through the shard flared one last time, and Vos opened her eyes. She spoke only a few words. "We're not alone. Use the signal." No one knew what she meant until the shard, now pulsing rapidly, emitted a high-frequency pulse that echoed through the void. Seconds later, something unexpected happened. From the far edge of known space, dozens of ancient signals reactivated. Long-lost defense platforms buried in forgotten systems lit up. Old ruins on distant moons started broadcasting. Earth had awakened something else, something older. The Gatewalker paused. For the first time, it hesitated. Earth wasn't the only one standing now. Something long buried had answered the signal. And it was coming. The line had held. But the war had just begun. The battle that shook the edge of soul space had ended in silence, but it was the kind of silence that didn't mean peace, it meant waiting. The Gatewalker had stopped advancing, frozen by the signal sent from the shard and the unexpected awakening of ancient systems across the stars, but no one believed it was over. It was only delayed. Earth's fleet, battered but unbroken, floated like a wall of iron across the black, their lights flickering as engineers worked non-stop to repair what they could. On board the ISS Nightfall, Admiral Cortez stood beside Commander Lyra Vos, now fully conscious but still weak, her mind scarred by the memories she never chose to carry. She explained what the visions had shown her how long ago, before the rise of Earth, a coalition of lost civilizations had faced something too powerful to destroy and instead had sealed it behind layers of space and time. That prison had worked for millions of years until now. When Earth interfered at Veltrax and entered that cursed sector, the last seal had weakened and the Gatewalker had begun to stir. But there was something even worse. Vos had seen a second image, a place twisted by time, where other creatures like the Gatewalker waited. Not dead, not asleep, just watching. And then she whispered what chilled Cortez to his core. It's not trying to reach Earth. It's trying to reach the assembly core. Her words set off alarms across every command channel. Earth's fleet had held the line at the edge of their system, but the true danger was moving elsewhere deep into assembly space, where the central worlds had grown lazy, arrogant, and blind behind layers of bureaucracy and peace treaties. Now, Earth had to do the unthinkable. They had to break into the assembly's heart and deliver a warning, or risk watching the entire galactic order collapse under a threat no one could imagine. Earth's request to speak before the Assembly High Council was rejected twice. The third time, they didn't ask, they arrived. A stealth fleet of Terran ships, led by the ISS Dauntless, broke through outer assembly patrols and jumped straight into orbit above Eridani Prime, the seat of the Council. Dozens of defense stations activated, but before they could fire, Earth broadcasted a live feed of the Gatewalker tearing apart a Karathi cruiser, one of the Assembly's most advanced warships, like it was paper. Then they transmitted the shard's signal, the pulse that had stopped the entity. When the broadcast ended, every Assembly leader sat in stunned silence. Chancellor Valor of the Talari Union tried to dismiss the images as a trick, but before he could finish his sentence, news came in from the Midrim. A colony called Drecker 3 had gone silent. Another breach. The Gatewalker was no longer heading for Sol. It had shifted course, sliding between the stars toward the center of the assembly. Cortez and Vos were granted an emergency audience in the council spire, where towering alien leaders sat behind force fields and diplomatic shields, still unwilling to accept that Earth, a young and often disliked species, might be the only thing standing between survival and extinction. Vos spoke first. Her voice shook, but her message was clear. Earth had made mistakes. They had broken rules, but they had done it to protect people who were left behind. She held up the shard and let its pulse echo through the room, and for a brief second, even the oldest assembly minds felt something cold and ancient brush against their thoughts. That was enough. The vote to cooperate passed, but just barely. The plan was desperate. The assembly had sealed away old weapons during their rise to power, devices considered too dangerous or unstable. Now they needed them. Vaults on forgotten moons were opened, and relics from wars long buried were pulled into service again. Earth worked side by side with former enemies, unlocking secrets the assembly had hidden even from themselves. Meanwhile, deep in subspace, sensors confirmed the Gatewalker had crossed into the inner corridor leading to the assembly core. Its path was strange. It didn't move like a ship or a creature, but like a thought infecting everything around it. Systems fell before it arrived, not from weapons, but from fear. AI broke down. Communications failed. Some colonies self-evacuated without receiving a single order, their leaders vanishing into the black, unwilling to face what was coming. Cortez knew they couldn't stop it head-on, but they could lure it. Using the shard and newly awakened relic beacons, Earth baited the entity into changing course again, pulling it toward the Assembly's own hidden breach site, an ancient place sealed in code and mystery, where even the Assembly itself had lost the original coordinate. Vose, guided by the visions still echoing in her mind, found it, a black rift behind a neutron star, marked by strange floating stones and whispering signals. That place had once been the first prison, and it could be again. The final operation was simple in theory, impossible in execution. Earth and Assembly forces would join together to draw the Gatewalker into the rift, then trigger a collapse pulse using the shard, cutting it off from the rest of space. But as they moved into position, something changed. The Gatewalker split. It created echoes of itself, half-real shapes that attacked across multiple systems at once. Some were illusions. Some were not. Chaos erupted. Ships were lost. Planets fell dark. But Earth didn't run. They stayed on target, pulling everything into one final trap. Vose personally carried the shard to the rift site, her mind burning with memories that weren't hers, guiding the fleet through dark space where no stars shined. As the Gatewalker arrived, the sky bent around it and everything stopped. Time slowed. Space broke. Ships froze in place. And then Vose activated the pulse. A blinding wave surged from the shard, amplified by the relic beacons Earth had deployed across dozens of hidden points. The Gatewalker screamed, not in sound, but in thought, and began to collapse inward, pulled back into the cage once thought forgotten. As the rift closed, the last thing seen through the collapsing light was a shape watching from behind it. Another one. Then the darkness vanished. The silence that followed was not peaceful, but it was victory. Barely. Earth's fleet limped home. The Assembly stood shaken, forced to admit their blindness nearly doomed them all. Cortez was offered medals. He refused them. Vose vanished from public view, taken to a deep facility for recovery. Some said she was still hearing voices. Earth, once considered reckless and wild, was now the symbol of survival. The Assembly was breached, yes, but it was Earth that saved it. Not for power. Not for control. But because someone had to draw the line. And Earth did,